You're watching Saturday Anime on the Sci-Fi Channel.
Greetings, this is Reverend Paul, and this is Raw. And once again, I am joined by Fairlie. Fairlie, how are you doing?
I'm okay, how are you?
I'm okay. Today, I thought it would be kind of fun to talk about favorite female anime character. Fairlie, do you have a favorite female anime character?
I had to think really hard about this one.
You like anime? How can you like anime and not have a favorite female character?
Okay. So when you asked me about this, I had to think really long and hard to find a character that I didn't just think was one of the same. Because I feel like a lot of anime characters, especially females, tend to kind of fit into like one or two different like tropes. And I don't want to just be the chick who talks about belladonna on your channel. So I wanted to kind of venture outside the box.
It's not like there are tons of chicks out there talking about belladonna of sadness. That's a pretty unique position to have.
I mean, that is the most niche of niche that like you could get, I think.
But it's cool, I take it.
Well, I had to dive back into my memory stores because you know what, like honestly, I went to school for art criticism. So like I can do the academic criticism thing. But for me, I really think it's a lot more impactful when you have a personal experience with something that means something to you. So I was really trying to figure out when you asked me, what my favorite female character was and what I thought made a good female character, I wanted to think of something I had a memorable experience with. And what I came back to was Yukari from Paradise Kiss, or Caroline, as they call her. That might be bold statement, and I'm not sure I'm going to stick to it, but that might be my favorite female anime character.
Paradise Kiss is written by Aizawa and tells the story of a young girl who is, I guess she's like discovering herself through like the world of fashion.
Yeah, so Aizawa was definitely one of my favorite manga artists when I was really into the whole scene. She did a couple really great series. She also did Nana, for anyone familiar with that series, which also actually has some pretty good female characters in it. I think Aizawa just generally writes pretty strong female characters. But in Paradise Kiss, Yukari is a high school student who's prepping for her college entrance exams and is kind of tapped by these art school students who are participating in a fashion show and want her to model. And through her involvement with them, discovers herself outside of the box that she's kind of been raised in and really clearly thought she had to go down. And I think that it's a really interesting character arc to watch as the series progresses.
I agree, and I like this series too because, as somebody who went to art school, there's a lot to relate to. Paradise Kiss really does capture the art school experience very well.
It does wax nostalgic. If you've ever been to an art school of any kind, whether it was fashion or otherwise, there's a lot of watching how these characters interact and, the things they talk about and hope for and, dream of definitely bring you back to those early art school college days.
I think my favorite character, if I had to pick one, I think it's Usagi from Sailor Moon.
Oh, I hate her so much.
Why is that?
Okay, so I really like Sailor Moon, okay? Like, don't get me wrong. I really like that series. It has a lot of really great plot points in it. They do some interesting things with the ideas that they use, but as a character, she's kind of irredeemably whiny and awful. In the manga, she does kind of go from whiny and awful to a little bit more mature. You do kind of see her make strong decisions and learn how to self-sacrifice and all of that, but it never really gets to a place where I can say like, oh, Usagi is now officially a mature lady and, has gotten past her selfish, whiny tendencies. Like, it's always too much there. That's what I can't get past. And honestly, the whole dynamic with her daughter that they end up bringing in later in the series, it's real weird and real creepy, and I can't get past it.
Sailor Moon was not the first magical girl series I seen. The first magical girl series I've ever saw was Devil Hunter Yoko. But Sailor Moon was the first magical girl series I saw that had like a rich lore to it. That really drew me in, like you were saying. It's got a really great story. The world building in that show is really great. But to me, Usagi is kind of like a mixture of like Peter Parker and Fry from Futurama. She is annoying. To me, that's what makes her relatable. She's obnoxious because she wears her feelings on her sleeve. And I feel like that's something I do too. Like, I'm kind of obnoxious myself, and it's like maybe I relate to the character because I'm kind of annoying just like she is. But I think a lot of kids are that way, and I think she is kind of an honest representation of the mentality of teenagers.
Maybe. I don't know. Like, look, you're talking to the wrong person on that one. I didn't go to high school, and I'm pretty sure I came out as a 30-year-old person, so I can't say that for sure. I think that the problem that I have with Usagi is that for as long as that series ran, and as much as occurs in that story, it feels to me like she only progresses minimally, where I think a good character is traceable. You have a beginning point, you have an end point, and even if those points are the same, you can see the decisions that are made that keep them there. So much happens in Sailor Moon that I guess ultimately I would want to see so much more growth from her. And yes, depending on what series you're talking about and where you're starting from and how much of it you've seen or read, technically the end point. Stars never really had an official release in America, and even, the manga is a little bit different than the anime, but there is kind of this moment of ultimate sacrifice that she has to make for the world at large, not even just her friends. And she does make it, so I'll give her the credit of maturity there. I would not have ever classified her as an unfeeling person. She's definitely a very emotional character throughout, but her as a person, when I'm thinking of like what would make a character worthy of being a favorite, or at least, in my mind, I like to see more personal growth, and I just don't see it in her throughout.
No, I mean, I can understand that. I mean, for me, I think it's more the temperament. She's almost like the Japanese anime equivalent of Peter Parker.
I feel like you can see her character traits in a lot of other characters. She doesn't really stand out as particularly unique in my memory bank of characters. Some of these traits, like being totally honest about how she feels, I feel like there's a lot of female characters that are like that. That kind of impulsive, childish, just out with it behavior does come up a lot. Fushigi Yugi came up in my radar as like, oh yeah, like Miyaka was an interesting female character. But honestly, when I was thinking about it, I'm like, I don't know, she's kind of like Usagi from Sailor Moon, except a different series. Except honestly, I think Miyaka matures a little bit more throughout the series than Usagi does. There's a lot of characters like that, especially in maybe the magical girl genre. And again, maybe that's just because this is a really classic series and it did kind of shape a lot that came after it. I could just be seeing that influence coming through. She just doesn't do it for me, I guess. That's the bottom line there.
I think what you're saying is a fair criticism, but I think that's something that happens with genre. When you're dealing with a genre, you have tropes, and so you have very specific characters. And even Peter Parker is not a particularly unique character. She is kind of an archetype. But I mean, why I would connect to her as opposed to another character that's like her just has to do with like the nuances of the Sailor Moon series. And, also the fact that, maybe it's also just because it's the first like magical girl series I really got into.
Yeah, no, that could definitely be part of it. One of the characters that I also, kind of considered when I was thinking about like who could possibly be my favorite, I did think about Ami from Sailor Moon, who would have been Sailor Mercury. Growing up as a kid, like child, I definitely liked her a lot as a character. But the reason that, again, I kind of couldn't come back to this and be like, oh no, hands down my favorite character, was because I can also point to a number of series that had this kind of bookish, shy, quiet girl character that stands up and becomes strong when she has to, And again, mostly magical girl series, like Magic Knight Rayearth. Oh no, I'm blanking on her name.
Fu?
Fu. Yeah, it was Fu.
What would you say to the idea that with Usagi, story is central to her, and she is the driving force of that story because she is destined to be Queen Serenity, the ruler of Crystal Tokyo. But with Paradise Kiss, Caroline is always tethered to a guy. In the beginning of the story, when she's all about cram school, she has a crush on that one dude. I forget his name, but in the dubbed version, he was voiced by Johnny Young Bosch. I kept thinking of him as Vash. When she was in cram school, she was in love with Vash, and she was all about cram school. Then when she gets into fashion, she's all about George. It almost feels like, to some degree, her universe or her interests are centered around guys and what they're interested in.
I guess I didn't really read it necessarily that way. So first of all, her crush on prep school guy, whose name is something very generic, it doesn't necessarily have a really strong plot point. It's kind of just like an anecdotal thing, like the picture of him is tucked into her student ID, and there really isn't a whole lot of development on that, other than just kind of a childhood crush. And then when she gets involved with the Paradise Kiss kids, she does become involved with George, but it kind of this like seduction that occurs. It's not because she necessarily develops this crush on him. He kind of like sweeps her off her feet and she becomes a little bit obsessed with him. And personally, I think this is very relatable to the female experience of growing up. You have your childhood crushes and they're just kind of innocent flirtations, and you know, you might have a picture of them in your locker or have their name on the inside of your notebook or something, but it really doesn't go beyond that, and you never even think about what a relationship would be like. You don't have any concept of that. And then at some point, something hits you like a freight train and you become involved with somebody for the first time, likely, and you learn this little bit of adulthood. And I mean, you're gonna look back as an actual adult and go, that was not an adult experience. But like, you know, at the moment, it's this preview into another way of life. And I think that's what we witness throughout the series for her, is her window into another experience opening wider and wider and wider as she gets away from what she's really been told will be her life through her mother. And I think that the dynamic with her mother is one of the most interesting parts of the series, because it is such an important element for a woman growing up to individuate from her mother and to kind of get out from that shadow of the devouring mother, which she clearly has. So I didn't really see it necessarily as her being exclusively tethered to a guy. Yeah, there are definitely guys involved in her story and they play a big role. At least George definitely plays a big role, but it's through awakening her innate femininity away from the experience of her family and her mother that we watch that happen.
I guess I would only say that one thing you could say about Sailor Moon is the fact that with Mamoru, he is central to her story. He almost feels like he's ancillary to her. Everybody is getting sucked into Usagi's world, where Caroline almost feels like she's getting sucked into George's world. They could have fixed this if she was somebody who was always interested in fashion and then used this as an opportunity to pursue her dream. But it just, to me, it almost felt like she was kind of like a blank slate that was just kind of looking for something to express herself in.
I actually think that's what makes it more interesting, because we're watching her discover a different way of life. We're watching her eyes open to the fact that there's more than her experience. And I think that's a really important moment of recognition, where that, I think, is actually what makes me feel like Usagi is just an irredeemably selfish character. Because you're right, everyone gets sucked into Usagi's world, and we don't have any experience of them outside of her. I remember reading the manga as a kid and really enjoying the like offshoot chapters where they explore stories from other perspectives. You know, there are a few issues of the manga that are Ami has a date, and you know, Rei has, you know, something going on in her life, and Usagi doesn't factor in. And I always thought those were maybe the most interesting issues that came out, because they allow you to experience these characters for who they are outside of Usagi's lens of her experience of them. I like that we see the world, yes, through Caroline's eyes, but we witness her perspective changing. Even some of the voiceover in the anime really reads like her journal entries of those moments after the fact, talking about the way that she felt these moments kind of dawn on her and realizing that she wasn't going to be the same afterwards. And I think that's a really powerful personal recognition to have. And I think it speaks volumes about the leaps in maturity that she's making in this moment of time that we're witnessing, not just in her life, but in all of their lives.
Yeah, I can see that. Paradise Kiss is much more, it's a more realistic depiction of adolescence and, growing into a woman, where Sailor Moon is much more, everything is metaphors. The Dark Kingdom and Queen Beryl, like all these things serve to be like, they're all metaphors for challenges a young person would face during their lives. Whereas with Paradise Kiss, there is much more of a 1-to-1 ratio with the experiences. So I could definitely see how for some people, it's a much more relatable experience. And like you mentioned before, the relationship with the mother is great. I think that's one thing. I do feel like Usagi and her relationship with her mother is something that is very underdeveloped in the series. And I do like in Paradise Kiss that Caroline and her mom have a very realistic mother-daughter relationship, especially when she comes back home after running away. Her mom is happy to see her, but she's also upset, and she is wrestling with those emotions of how to deal with her.
Yeah, it's a very human relationship. I actually think that they do a really good job of giving most of the characters in that series very human elements. Even Yukari's initial reaction when they take her to the atelier and are like, we want you to model for the show, and she's just like, are you kidding me? You want me to do something as frivolous as model in a fashion show? I've got cram school. And like, she has this very self-important reaction, and it's not until Miwako opens up to her and explains the joy that they take and the importance in their future that this really could have, that she realizes that it is their version of this experience for her. And we kind of watch that mathematic equation play out in her mind of realizing that there is more to life. There's so many little human moments in this series, which the anime is only like 12 episodes or something like that, but it's really packed with very emotional content. And I guess maybe that's also my not real beef with Sailor Moon, is that we're talking seasons and we don't really see a lot of human relationships between Usagi and other people, because it really is the Usagi show. Her mother is like the mom in Pokemon games where it's just like, okay, ma, see ya, and then you're gone forever, So like, there's not a whole lot going on. She has a little brother, and like, I think we see him like twice or something in like all of the things that happen in that series. So there's not a whole lot of humanity there. I understand that it's a fairy tale and that really it's kind of just like a mythological exploration, but even mythology is so human at its core that I guess as a grown-up human adult, I just expect a little bit more from characters at this point in my life.
It is a missed opportunity with Usagi's mother, because you have Chibiusa there, where it's her daughter. She has this weird relationship with her future daughter. You could make something of that where like she's learning from her mother how to be a mother and not be like a friend to her daughter, but like they never explore that.
Yeah, that whole dynamic is really strange, and that's a rabbit hole in and of itself. Her relationship with her future daughter, like her daughter goes back in time to be with her as a younger person, and instead of any sort of human relationship, they have this very dysfunctional rivalry happening for like what is ultimately the father's affection. It's very dysfunctional and honestly a little creepy if you analyze it too hard.
I mean, it's dysfunctional, but that is a realistic depiction of dysfunctional relationships where you have a mother and daughter competing for the affections of the father.
In the most gross and like caricature-esque way possible. Yeah, no, it's definitely, it's a trope, it's a type, but that's exactly what it is that turns me off about her, is that she is a collection of tropes. She's a collection collection of archetypes that don't really go anywhere.
I don't think she's that different from Caroline. I just think it's the world that they live in and the way they kind of like express those ideas, because I feel like they do get to the same place. They both start off as these naive teenagers and then they become these confident women. And even though Usagi's personality doesn't change, like you said, she does make the ultimate sacrifice. I think that's something the Usagi of episode 1 wouldn't have done. So I think Usagi does grow, but Sailor Moon is an action adventure story. So Usagi has to stay the same the way Batman has to stay the same. So we don't see like huge change in her character, but we do see maturity in her decisions. And I think that's just a stylistic thing. It's a world thing. They both kind of get to the same place. I guess it's the way they get there that's different.
Maybe it is a world difference. Maybe the world of Paradise Kiss is just more realistic. Maybe it's the vehicle that they operate within, you know? Yeah, Sailor Moon is a magical girl anime story. It really can't exist outside of that genre. Paradise Kiss is kind of more of like a soap opera in a way. I actually didn't realize until I went to rewatch it that they did a live action version of the series, and it really just watches like any other romance drama series, which I watched the live action Sailor Moon. There is nothing normal about that. So like that exists in its own little bubble.
It takes place in this weird cosplay universe. I mean, that's a world I want to live in, where everybody has bad wigs and like they wear Party City costumes everywhere.
It's a world where changing your hair color makes you unrecognizable to everyone else.
That's Clark Kent rules, you know?
Exactly.
Did you see that recently? I saw this story recently where I thought it was hysterical, where there was some TikToker where he tried to rob this place, but he had like colorful dreadlocks, and all he did was just wear a face mask, and like he left his colorful dreadlocks exposed so everybody recognized him.
I feel like that's the most TikTok crime that could ever have happened.
Like he thought Clark Kent rules apply, like he could wear a minimal amount of disguise and nobody would recognize him.
I would absolutely believe that guy has a thriving TikTok.
This guy probably came from the live action Sailor Moon universe where you could just put on a wig and nobody will know who you are.
Yeah.
Do you have anything else to say on favorite female character?
Ultimately, I think what it boils down to is just your priorities in what you look for in a character in general. Everything that you said about Usagi is perfectly relevant. It's just not what I look for, I get, like not what makes something impactful to me. And probably why I keep arriving back at like, I don't know, you know? Like why I had such a hard time figuring out who my favorite female character was.
So much of this is personal.
Yeah.
Like knowing you as well as I do, if you would have told me you wrote Paradise Kiss, I would believe you. Because so much of it is reflective of your personality. The style and the music, I could totally understand why you would like it. And I think the same could be said for me with Sailor Moon. You know, she hangs out at a video arcade. She's really obnoxious, you know? There's a lot of monsters in it. Like a lot of that reflects my personality.
It's definitely true, and I think that's worth noting too, because I think about a lot of the stories that I see written, whether by young people or old people. I just moved recently and I unearthed all of these old notebooks from my past, and some of the stories that I wrote, they were god awful. And it's because they were really just these very loosely veiled fictional recountings of things that I did with my friends, and like we're just the characters. And I think that you see that a lot where people will pick favorite characters based on what they can relate to, based on where they see themselves reflected. So ultimately, when it comes to favorite female character, it's gonna be a little difficult for me not to pick something that I have a deep emotional reaction to. And I did not live Paradise Kiss. I certainly wish that there were elements of that. I would love that wardrobe, but it's not too far off from an experience that I recognize as a viable one in the world that I've learned from and had those lessons through. Sailor Moon is a bit more of a stretch for me. I love the series. I think it has some great plot points. The world building is great. The mythology is excellent, but not relatable to me. So I think that it's often just as simple as that. What do you relate to? What do you want to relate to? What experiences have you had, and what characters have had them?
俺より強いやつに会いに行く。ファイティングアクションゲーム「ストリートファイター2」スーパーファミコンで好評発売中。
Capcom.
This week's question comes from Javier, and Javier writes, what microphone do you use? Do you process your audio after recording because you sound awesome? Your sound is better than most of the top YouTubers. Thank you, Javier, I appreciate that. And thank you for sending a question. I have no idea what kind of microphone this is. When I decided I was going to start making YouTube videos, I just went on Amazon and I just searched for a condenser mic that was in my price range, and I just bought the first one that I saw. And I think I spent like, I don't know, maybe $100. I didn't spend a lot. I'm not a person that obsesses over having like the best equipment. I don't need the best equipment. I just need something that's going to get the job done. And yes, I do process my audio after I'm done recording. I play guitar, so, you know, I have a little bit of a background in recording and mixing music, so I'm not an engineer. I just do very simple stuff to try to make the audio as smooth as possible. I could probably get these videos done a lot quicker if I didn't do any processing to the audio, but especially in the beginning when I first started, I didn't want to give people an excuse to click out of the video. I didn't want someone to click on the video and then be like, oh, this video has shitty audio, and then just click out of it. I'm an artist, and I always try to do everything I can to make the work to be the best quality it can be. And if I may speak freely, I think a lot of bigger YouTubers out there, or maybe even just a lot of YouTubers in general, are very lazy. They think just because they could record 6 hours of raw audio that they should post 6 hours of raw audio, and it's like, look, dude, just because you can ramble and talk for a really fucking long time doesn't mean you have a lot of shit worth listening to. That's just my 2 cents. But if you would like to send me a question, or if you'd like to suggest a topic for a video, or, you know, you just want to say whatever, you can send me an email at studiochojin@gmail.com, make the subject raw, and I will eventually read this on a future edition of this program. So that wraps up this week's edition of Studio Chojin Raw. I hope you enjoyed the video. I think this video deserves a little bit of an asterisk because it really is hard to pick one favorite female character. For the sake of the video, I limited myself to one, but really Usagi is one of my favorite female characters. I am a lover of many anime chicks, so I have many favorite female characters, and we will be talking about more of my favorite female characters in the future, so I hope you will return for that. So once again, this is Reverend Paul saying, until we meet again.